Chuck Norris is one of those names that almost everyone knows, whether through movies, martial arts, or even the famous internet jokes about his strength. But what many people do not realize is just how difficult his early years were. Chuck was born as Carlos Ray Norris in March 1940, in a very small town in Oklahoma called Ryan. His family was extremely poor. Their little house did not have basic things like indoor bathrooms or even electricity. Winters were so cold that the family had to sleep in their clothes just to stay warm. At one point, they survived for more than a month on nothing but beans and cornbread, eating the same thing for 47 days in a row. On top of the poverty, Chuck was born sick with jaundice and weighed only about 5 pounds. Doctors were not sure if he would survive, but against all odds, the tiny baby lived, and his mother believed there had to be a special reason for it. Life continued to be hard, though his father, Ray Norris, returned from World War II, deeply troubled, often drinking heavily. By the time Chuck was 9, his father was drinking 2 bottles of whiskey every day. His parents eventually divorced when Chuck was 12, leaving the boy with more responsibilities than any child should carry. He worked small jobs like shining shoes, delivering newspapers, and helping in fields to support the family. Even though he was shy, quiet, and often picked on, Chuck carried within him a spirit of survival that would later define his entire life in school. Chuck was not the kind of student anyone would expect to become a Hollywood action star. He was shy to the point that teachers said he could go an entire day without saying a word. He struggled with stage fright so badly that he once threw up before giving a book report and then refused to try again, accepting a failing grade instead. He also stuttered and avoided speaking certain letters. Physically, he was small, only 5'2", and less than 100 pounds at age 15. He ate lunch alone, often in the school boiler room, because he was too shy to join others. Life at home wasn't easier. His father was absent, and when Chuck turned 13, his dad sent him a wrinkled $5 bill as a birthday gift. Chuck kept that bill for many years as a reminder of what he did not want to become. Things changed when his family moved to Torrance, California. There, Chuck met Diane Holchick, the girl who would become his first wife. At 16, he gathered enough courage to ask her to dance at a school event, and from there, their relationship grew. They married when Chuck was only 18, right after high school. But Chuck needed a career, and with little money or opportunities, he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force. Life in the military was not easy either. He failed his first tests, struggled with fitness, and even got into trouble a few times. At first, he had never even been in a fight. But his time in Korea while serving changed everything, because that was where Chuck discovered martial arts. When Chuck was sent to South Korea in the late 1950s, the locals had difficulty pronouncing his real name, Carlos. They began calling him Chuckles, which his commander later shortened to Chuck. That was how the name stuck for life. During this period, he felt lost and wandered into a judo school one night. A much smaller instructor defeated him easily, which surprised him deeply. Instead of quitting, he decided to come back the next day and start learning seriously. Soon, Chuck was training under a Korean master named Kim Bokman, learning Tam Sudo, a martial art focused on strong strikes and discipline. The name Chuck also took on a new meaning for him, as in Korean it sounded like strong fist. After years of training, Chuck returned to the United States with a black belt and a new purpose. He began to study more martial arts styles, like Shotokan, American Kenpo, and Judo, eventually mixing techniques to create his own method. To support himself, Chuck worked at Northrop Aviation during the day and opened a small martial arts school at night. At first, very few Americans even knew about Tang Soo Do. But Chuck's energy and teaching ability began to attract attention. Slowly, his school grew, and within 2 years he was able to quit his job and focus on teaching full-time. His schools became so popular that celebrities like Steve McQueen and Bob Barker joined his classes. But Chuck wanted more than just teaching. He wanted to test himself in real tournaments. When Chuck first entered tournaments, he did not perform well. He lost several matches, including two famous fighters like Joe Louis and Tony Toulouse. But, instead of being discouraged, Chuck used every loss as motivation. He trained harder, studied his opponents, and kept coming back. By the late 1960s, everything started to change. Chuck began winning major tournaments, defeating top fighters like Skipper Mullins and Steve Sanders. In New York, he won at Madison Square Garden, which is also where he first met Bruce Lee, who was giving a demonstration. Their meeting turned into a friendship, and later they trained together, helping each other sharpen their skills. In 1968, Chuck won the Professional Middleweight Karate Championship, which he held until he retired in 1974. During that time, he completely changed how Americans viewed karate, building respect for martial arts across the country. He created organizations like the National Tang Soo Do Congress and later the United Fighting Arts Federation. His schools produced hundreds of black belts, and his tournament team stayed undefeated for years. By the time he stepped away from competition, Chuck Norris was no longer just a martial artist, he was a champion, a teacher, and a man whose reputation was spreading far beyond the dog ace. It was one of Chuck's celebrity students, Steve McQueen, who suggested he try acting. Chuck had already made a tiny appearance in The Wrecking Crew, but the real break came when Bruce Lee invited him to play the villain in The Way of the Dragon. The movie became a global success, and the final fight between Bruce and Chuck in the Roman Colosseum is still considered one of the greatest martial arts scenes ever filmed. From there, Chuck worked hard to build his own acting career. He took classes, studied the craft, and slowly began to land leading roles. His breakthrough came with movies like Breaker, and Good Guys Wear Black. Chuck personally promoted the latter, giving thousands of interviews, and even falling sick from exhaustion. But the effort worked, the film made huge profits, and Chuck proved he could carry a movie on his own. Soon, the 1980s became his era. Films like A Force of One, The Octagon, and Lone Wolf McQuade made him a household name. He signed a big deal with Cannon Films, and starred in Missing in Action, which became a massive hit. The movie was dedicated to his brother, who had died in Vietnam, giving it a personal touch. Chuck was no longer just a martial artist, he was now one of Hollywood's biggest action stars. While movies made Chuck famous, television made him legendary. In the 1990s, he starred in Walker, Texas Ranger, a show that ran for 9 seasons and over 200 episodes. The character Cordell Walker was a mix of Chuck's real-life values, part Cherokee, part Irish, a veteran, and a martial artist who stood up for justice. The show mixed action with moral lessons, something Chuck strongly believed in. Audiences loved it, and it became one of the most popular shows of the decade. At the same time, Chuck's personal life was going through changes. His first marriage ended after nearly 3 decades, partly because of an affair that led to the birth of his daughter, Dina. But later, Chuck found love again with Gina Ojweli, whom he married in the late 1990s. At age 61, Chuck became a father, again, to twins, which surprised him so much that he almost fainted when the doctor announced there were 2 babies instead of 1. With this new family, Chuck decided to step back from Hollywood to spend more time with his children. Many thought this would be the quiet end of his career, but Chuck Norris was far from finished. The internet had other plans. In the 2000s and 2010s, a new generation discovered Chuck Norris in an unexpected way through memes. Chuck Norris facts, funny internet jokes about his strength and toughness, spread like wildfire online. Suddenly, young people who had never seen his movies were laughing at lines like Chuck Norris doesn't do push-ups, he pushes the earth down. Far from being upset, Chuck embraced the humor and played along, keeping his name alive in pop culture. At the same time, he built a business empire. He launched brands like Seaforce, Premium Water, and Lone Wolf Ranch Pet Food, both inspired by his Texas ranch. His bottled water company even operated on his own land, where he had built a self-sufficient facility. He also wrote several books, including Black Belt Patriotism and The Justice Riders, which became bestsellers. By the 2020s, his net worth was around $70 million, thanks to smart real estate investments and decades of work in entertainment. Even at 85, Chuck continued to share moments with fans. Whether through social media posts, public appearances, or business projects. He might not be throwing punches on screen anymore, but his influence remains just as strong. Chuck Norris started life as a sickly child in poverty, and against every odd, he grew into a world champion, a Hollywood star, a businessman, and a cultural icon. And knowing Chuck, the fight is never really over. Chuck Norris may be one of the most famous action stars in the world, but his story did not begin with red carpets or cameras. Born Carlos Ray Norris in 1940, in a small town in Oklahoma, Chuck grew up in poverty. His family's house had no electricity or indoor plumbing, and winters were so cold they often had to sleep in their clothes to stay warm. Food was scarce, and there was a time when the family survived on nothing but beans and cornbread for nearly 7 weeks straight. To make things harder, Chuck was born sick with jaundice and weighed just 5 pounds. Doctors doubted he would survive, but he did, showing even then the fighting spirit that would define him. His father, Ray Norris, had returned from World War II, deeply troubled, and turned to alcohol, drinking heavily every day. This instability eventually broke up the family when Chuck was just 12 years old. From then on, Chuck worked small jobs like delivering newspapers, shining shoes, and walking miles to work at a grocery store for $12 a week, just to help his family survive. These struggles shaped his determination, even though at the time, he was a shy, quiet boy who often kept to himself, finding strength through struggles as a teenager. Chuck faced many challenges. He was small in size, painfully shy, and even struggled with a stutter. At school, teachers said he could go an entire day without speaking, and he often ate lunch alone in the boiler room. He was even mistaken for not being a student when his class photo was taken because he blended into the background so much. But life took a turn when his family moved to California. There, Chuck met his first wife, Diane Holchick, and married her at 18. With limited money and a new family to support, Chuck enlisted in the U.S. Air Force. At first, he struggled with the training, even failing fitness tests. But the Air Force gave him something more valuable than a paycheck. It introduced him to martial arts. Stationed in South Korea, Chuck discovered Tang Soo Do, a Korean martial art. At first, he was easily beaten by smaller fighters. But instead of giving up, he trained harder, eventually earning a black belt. This was also when he got the name Chuck. Locals had trouble pronouncing his given name, Carlos, so they called him Chuckles, which his commander shortened to Chuck. Returning to the US with a new skill, Chuck began teaching martial arts while working at Northrop Aviation. His schools became popular, drawing in students that included celebrities like Steve McQueen and Priscilla Presley. But Chuck wanted to test himself beyond teaching. He wanted to compete. From defeat to champion, Chuck's early martial arts tournaments were tough. He lost several matches and was defeated by fighters like Joe Louis and Tony Toulouse. But instead of letting failure stop him, Chuck used those losses to fuel his training. By the late 1960s, he began to win major competitions, eventually defeating top fighters and earning the title of professional middleweight karate champion in 1968. He defended this title until his retirement in 1974, never losing again at that level. Along the way, he helped introduce karate to a much wider American audience. He built organizations, trained hundreds of black belts, and even led a team that went undefeated for years. His friendship with Bruce Lee, which began after they met at a tournament in New York, further boosted his reputation. They trained together, learning from each other, and in 1972, Bruce invited Chuck to appear as his opponent in The Way of the Dragon. Their epic battle scene in the Roman Colosseum is still considered one of the greatest martial arts moments ever filmed. By then, Chuck Norris had become more than just a fighter. He was on the road to becoming a star. Hollywood's success. Chuck's film career took off after his appearance with Bruce Lee. Determined not to live in Lee's shadow, he took acting classes and worked tirelessly to improve. His first major leading roles came with Breaker, and Good Guys Wear Black. For the latter, Chuck personally traveled across the country, giving more than 2,000 interviews to promote the film. The hard work paid off,